If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Amitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
There's an African proverb that says, opportunities are never lost. They go to someone who's awake and ready to host them attentively. Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for joining me today. Together, we are changing the conversation around the world about equity and education. We are changing the trajectories of the lives of marginalized and oppressed children across the globe. And that makes me happy. That gives me joy. And I hope it does you too. Keep in mind, there's a special email down in the notes for this episode that you can use if you want to let someone who is hosting a conference or an event know that these messages can be brought to them face-to-face, live and in person, around the world, for that matter. Back in May, a couple of years ago, May 2020, that seems like so long ago, and yet not that long ago. Something happened in May 2020 that changed the landscape of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. You know what it is? Do you remember? George Floyd. Searches for the term DEI on the internet skyrocketed. Positions for chief diversity officer grew at a scale that I don't think anyone imagined. I guess you would call it an unprecedented rate. On LinkedIn, there are now 16,000 diversity professionals. If we break that down, 574 of those are chief diversity officers. 3% of them are in the C-suite. DEI has moved into the C-suite in just the last 3 years since the death of George Floyd, May 2020. Overall, there's been a 16.2% increase in executive team members, and it's not slowing down. Right now, the most sought after position in both the public and private sector is a DEI person, whether it's a DEI chief, a chief diversity officer, DEI director, by whatever label, it's that DEI person. And you know what? And this is huge. It is also the highest turnover position among professionals, the highest turnover positions. Why? Why is it that organizations cannot hold on to that DEI person once they've got them? Well, in my humble but fairly well-informed opinion, and certainly backed by scads of peer-reviewed research, my opinion, there are two reasons for this. Reason number one is a lack of commitment. Now, maybe you heard my episode, The Bullshit of Performative Equity. That's that lack of commitment. It's a check-the-box item. We now have a DEI officer. We now have a DEI initiative. Check. They want people to provide these inspirational events. Let's have our chief diversity officer open up our sales meeting or our, whatever event, our back to school meeting, whatever it is, that kickoff event. Number one, a lack of commitment. Performative equity. Check the box. No one who is truly committed to DEI wants to be the performative equity person. Okay, number two, there's a fear of a loss of power. So when you engage in DEI and A, remember the A, anti-racism, it requires a top to bottom examination of organizations from the CEO to the, mailroom, whatever the bottom of the organization is, your line workers, your staff workers, your people on the street, and numbers don't lie. As organizations start to engage in equity audits, when they do that top to bottom examination just of hiring and promotion data, retention data, and if there's an opportunity for people in the organization to speak their truth without fear of retribution, you also start to find out about all the nepotism that goes on. And so when organizations get called on their bullshit, they're ready to bail. There is a cluelessness that comes from this overwhelmingly white male C-suite, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector as well. Now, they may not be called the C-suite when you're talking about K-12 school systems and other LEAs, but essentially We know who that is or what that is. It is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly clueless, in spite of maybe sometimes their best efforts, or sometimes it's just been a performative effort or no effort at all. If you've never been subjected to racism, you don't get it. If you've never been close enough to a scary racist event and you're not the subject of that racism, you may not get it. It's got to hit home. So having this DEI initiative may sound like a really good idea until you find out that through your understanding, this new understanding that you are gaining of systemic oppression, of marginalization, of microaggressions and macroaggressions, in that process, when you find out that you've been complicit, when you find out that maybe you are a racist, even D'Angelo describes as a nice racist, it doesn't feel so good. And so people who are in charge of hiring these C-suite DEI people are not necessarily listening to the DEI people that they hire. And they're not doing the work. And they're not listening to the people that are the most affected by the work. And that's where you get back into that performative equity versus authentic equity. And so you have the churn, a new DEI person, because we can only take so much. All of these things have one thing in common. Do you know what it is? White fragility and white backlash. I guess that's two things, but I'm going to lump them together. And really, until white people who control the workings of organizations, those who are in positions of power, when they have to recognize their whiteness, they have to understand their fragility, and they have to make a public commitment to putting aside their own fragility and fears and going forward with the work. That's when things can begin to change in an organization. No one is ever going to be ready for the reality that they will face as they begin to work in recognizing, confronting, dismantling racist and oppressive workplaces and schools. I want you to keep in mind the words of Richie Norton, no one you've ever heard of before. He was a time management expert, and he wrote, here's the quote, "The world is changed by people who aren't ready." I'm going to say that again. The world is changed by people who aren't ready. No one is ever ready for the hard work of DEI&A, even though they may profess to be. But I would say that you only have to be ready. You only have to be ready to receive the pain and the awakening that you'll experience as you journey down that path, as you recognize what racism is, and you make that commitment to become an anti-racist. And folks, this is where you can help today. Keep carrying this message and let people know, let particularly white people know that they will never be ready. And that's okay. It's okay. They just got to jump in and do it. Just do it. You'll be all right. No one ever died from going through an awakening and discovering that they have engaged in racist behavior. And they'll be that much better for going through the struggle. And then join me again next time. Send me your questions, topics, and requests to AskDrBerry.com, and I will answer those questions and bring you experts to help address those topics. Don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. I'll see you next time.
That's it for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Dr. Berry herself. Be sure to head over to 3epodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Dr. Berry's gift. Then join us on the next episode.